For those of you that are thinking about the recent price drop of the Sony A7 III, should you make this purchase right now? I've got some thoughts, some opinions, and I want to get into that. And like I said, just give you my thoughts and opinions on it so that you can make that buying decision. So let's go. What is up, you beautiful humans? Welcome back to the channel, and this is not a typical video that I have on this channel. So if you are here for the other content that I have, stay tuned for that because it is in post-production. I have a lot of content coming out on this channel. So yeah, like I said, subscribe and stay tuned for that. Now, I felt like the internet is going crazy when it comes to the A7 III, specifically the fact that as we're heading into the end of 2019 and heading into 2020, that the price has dropped on that A7 III from $1999, so just under $2,000 US, into $1799 territory. What in the world is going on there? Sony versus Canon, and how I think that it's very similar to the Apple versus Samsung. I'll unpack that in a moment, but let's actually get back to the cameras. Now, I can relate to those of you out there that probably have your shopping cart full with the Sony A7 III, but you are reluctant to pull that trigger because for many of us, we're thinking like, oh, just around the corner, there's gonna be an announcement. We know it. We've been waiting for the unicorn, which is the A7S III from Sony. And what do I do here? And then is there an A7 Mark IV coming? If the discounted A7 III, what is going on? Is this just a holiday thing? So here are my thoughts, folks. Talking about the A7 III, first and foremost, you gotta ask yourself a couple of things. And these are the things that I have asked myself when it comes to purchasing that camera and whether I wanted to wait. The 30-minute recording limit has been an obstacle for me because I like to just hit the record button and go and just leave the camera on. And a couple of other features when it comes to what the A7 III is offering, especially when we're looking at 422 10-bit. In this day and age, and what I like to film and what I'm actually looking for when it comes to not only pushing the colors within that camera, but also in my post-production and getting more of that in my particular post-production. At $1799 US, the fact that this camera is now teasing the Sony A6600, and again, APS-C line, if you're in the APS-C ecosystem and you're thinking like, I'm ready to move up to full frame, but you already have these cameras, like these are the 6400, the 6600, these are capable cameras, I'm sure, for creating a lot of great content, and especially if you're doing YouTube or you're creating content online, and even some of your pro work. I've done pro work on these cameras. They're fantastic cameras. So if you need the full frame camera, like right now, to make some money, it's your bread and butter, it's something that you need to create the content, to get paid, and you're looking at the investment as like, wow, a couple $100s off, now I can actually get into full frame because we know full frame glass, right? Like, sure, these lenses are interchangeable, but why do you want to put an APS-C lens on your full frame camera? You don't. So taking that extra $200 to invest in some glass, I think that could be a great investment. Now, where I think you might be like me in the fact that we know that we're around the corner from some kind of announcement happening here, and if I purchase the A7 III, which I don't need right now at this very moment, I am fine with what I have right now, then I think I might be okay to wait until these announcements that come in around February 2020 to anywhere between then and April. So let's actually talk about the successor of the A7 Mark III. Many people haven't been talking about an A7 Mark IV necessarily, and then what would that mean to muddy the waters up, especially as we're starting to tease pricing with A7 III and A6600? Well, here's the thing. I think that, so we've seen some rumored 36 megapixel sensors from Sony, or at least, you know, on these Sony rumor sites. So there has definitely been something there that we know is going to go into a camera. And so are we going to stick with the 24 megapixel, add a new chipset in there, and work with some of the battery life and the capability of getting 4K 60 in an A7 IV? Well, I think that is a possibility. I think that the A7 IV, and I could be eating some crow on this one, in that we could see 4K 60, we could see 10-bit in there, we could see 2 SD card slots at UHS 2, and a couple of other upgrades. If it's coming in at a price point of around $2,000, and then I got the A7 III that may come down another $100, but then you're really teasing the 6600, which I think the aps-c lines are gonna, I think that line, we might see some incremental decreases so that we can differentiate between that and something like the A7 III. But if the A7 IV comes in at around a $2,000 price point, and if it can shoot 4K 60, man, that is gonna be an aggressive camera. But I also have something here that I think is what's going on with Sony versus Canon and putting the foot on the throat. So Sony putting the foot on the throat of Canon, because we have the EOS R that was priced not necessarily aggressively for what it did, and now is at $1799. So I definitely think that Sony is teasing that out a little bit. Yeah, it's the holidays and whatnot, but I think they're teasing that out a little just to see what's gonna happen. Because we know that Canon has released specs, at least not everything, but we know the specs of the 1DX Mark III. I'm not talking about apples and oranges. I realize that is not a mirrorless camera. I realize that that is like a $6,000 price point, and that is a pro camera. What are you talking about? Just think about the marketing here for just a second. Well, let's table it, but I'll unpack that. The A7S Mark III, potentially here, 36 megapixel sensor, upgraded chipset to work with the battery life, getting improved battery life. And I feel like this camera is already there. I feel like it is sitting on a shelf ready to be released, and everybody's worried about 4K 60 and it's overheating and Sony can't figure it out. They're using the bodies that they're using for the A9 Mark II and the A7R4, and it's gonna be a bigger footprint. I think they figured out the venting issue, and what I think, this is gonna be nuts, but I think what we might see here is 6K. I do think that, listen, we know what these sensors are capable of. We know what we can do. It's just a matter of, yeah, so the heat dissipation and how do we manage that, and the battery life. So the possibility of Sony competing with the Blackmagic Pocket, the 6K capability of that camera, like I said, it's not necessarily a competitor, but it's food for, it's something to think about as a filmmaker. And then when you've got the 1DX Mark III coming out, and like I said, I know that that is not a mirrorless camera. I know $6,000 versus like a $3,000-ish camera. It's gonna make people think a little bit. It really will. So the possibility of 4K then getting, 60 would be awesome. But the 6K capability, I know that we'd need the hardware to drive all this stuff, to edit all this stuff, the ability to consume all of these things. But Sony could really surprise us here. They really could. Like I said, if the Blackmagic, I think that ecosystem, that camera, I think that they're doing a fantastic job. But I also feel like someone like Sony could come in and say, you know what, we've got these lenses, we've got this E-mount system, and it all works together. So we've got the sensors, and just like Samsung making screens for these phones, i.e., Apple, and that sort of tit for tat, like, hey, Apple just announced the iPhone this, and then Samsung's like, all right, here we go, boom, we just dropped ours too. Same thing, Sony and Canon. Waiting for their announcement, waiting for their release, and then Sony's like, oh yeah, okay, we got ours too, right there. So, not that you want to drop that on the floor or mic drop or whatever, but that's what I see. It's a bit of a tit for tat. Sony and Canon, just like Apple and Samsung, but at the same time stunting some of the possibilities, some of the capabilities of what this tech can do. Just like Apple, listen, I use Mac computers, I don't use iPhones, but what they do, because everything's got to be thinner and lighter, and so you have got no heat dissipation whatsoever, and then you have to actually throttle the capability of what the processor can do. I mean, that's what's being done with these sensors, but Sony, I think, might show up a little bit here, surprise us with an A7 Mark IV for that prosumer entry, and the A7S III, the unicorn, for that professional that could be looking to either maybe change the ecosystem, or to say, like, I'm ready to move up, and instead of me moving into Canon, I'm actually going to try moving into the Sony ecosystem here, because it's going to offer me what I need, but really be the professional camera. And for somebody thinking about the A7 Mark III, you're probably not thinking about the A7S III because it's a different price point, it's a different set of capabilities because it's not just the camera, but then you actually have to have the hardware to be able to edit all that video, but just some things to think about. So going back to answer your question, distilling it down, if you need this camera now, if you need the A7 III now, if this is something that you make money with, something that you need the camera because you need to create and go out there and do the things, and giving you the dad talk, like don't get hung up on the specs and whatever, just go and create. Go do that stuff, take the action and stop worrying about all the specs. But on the flip side of that, to actually contradict myself, if you are going to feel like you've lost here because you've purchased the A7 III and then just a couple short months from now, they're releasing these new cameras, then I would say wait. What are your thoughts? I always love having those conversations with you in the comment section below. Like I said, I've got more videos coming out here, so just stay tuned for those. As always, go out there and do those things that matter. You keep rocking those faces. You go do the things. I've got those videos in post-production now. I'm gonna upload them and I will be right here, and I can't wait to get you right back here on the next one.